Secure your Elixir apps with Paraxial IO. From code analysis and bot defense to dependency checks, they've got you covered. Elixir first design with GitHub integration. Elevate your security at Paraxial.io. All right, what's up, guys? So we have been going through the meta-programming, the Elixir guide meta-programming. Let me just pull it up. Safari. Oh, I should share my screen. All right, so we have been doing the Elixir guides, and we are currently going through the meta-programming. And so right here, we have done quote and unquote macros, and we are not going to do the domain-specific languages today because we had Andrés write an awesome article where he shared a bunch of tips that he wished he knew when he first started learning macros. And I thought before we dive into the DSL section, it would be a great opportunity to go over his quick little article. So that's what we're doing today. And Andrés is an awesome dude. I've had him on my podcast, and I highly suggest following him on Twitter and all of his projects that he's working on. He does a lot of awesome machine learning stuff, a lot of live book, and he's created two awesome libraries as well. Merquery, which I believe is like an HTTP client. Also, sorry, there's a weed whacker going outside of my door. And then Flint, I can't remember what Flint is. Oh, yes. Embedded schema for data validation using Ecto. And that's also a really cool project. So if you don't follow Andrés, I highly recommend doing it. And then, Merquery is, just make sure I didn't get it wrong. Yeah, it's an HTTP client for Livebook, which is really cool. So definitely check that stuff out. I know he mentions it throughout this article, because I think building those two projects is where he learned a lot about macros. And I feel like I need to create a really good project where I have to write a macro, because that's the best way to really get your hands dirty and learn about them. Like, I've made very simple ones. I made a course section on macros where I built my own DSL off of like a sales discount system, part of a inventory management project. And that was really cool. I learned a lot. But I feel like, you got to just keep getting your hands dirty so you can grasp this stuff. So we will jump in. What's up, everyone? We got a few people here so far, so that's cool. I'm surprised how many people joined from X. I like to see that. I had to say hello in two places because Restream doesn't post to X, but we can read X's comments from Restream, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. So, all right. Macros Quick Tips by Andrés Alejos. Follow him on Twitter. Dude's an awesome dude. Super nice guy. Let me make this bigger if I can. Yeah, that should be good. I think this will be more of a read through and discuss. Hey, what's up, Adrian? So in the course of writing a few of my projects, he talks about Merquery, which is his HTTP client, and Flint, which is his embedded schemas in Ecto for validation. Both cool projects. Go check them out. I'll add them to the description. I don't have them in there, but he wrote this nice article up, I think last week. He did it when I announced doing the Elixir guides, which is really cool. I love that. So it's added, it's like bonus content to what we already have in the Elixir documentation, which I love. So in the course of writing a few of his projects, I've used meta-programming and macros more and more. In fact, Flint is chock full of macros, and since Merquery is a Kino smart cell, it uses meta-programming to convert a UI widget state from user input into Elixir code. Elixir's documentation is really quite spectacular, but there are still some common patterns and lessons I learned about metaprogramming and macros that I want to emphasize. The use keyword. I think the use keyword can be a bit confusing to beginners, largely because it is often taught at the same time as import, alias, and require. And I feel like even like in my Elixir course, I am probably guilty of this. You kind of cram it in there and you're teaching this concept before people really even know what macros are, right? So I will just reiterate here a snippet taken directly from the docs. Generally speaking, so you'll see, you'll do this for like gen server, supervisors, things like that. You'll see the use keyword and a lot of other macros, obviously. And so you'll say use and then the name of the module, and then you can pass in your options. But behind the scenes, it's compiled into using require and feature, and we're just calling a using macro that is taking in our options. So under the hood, use is just another macro, and that I know we've talked about that. Let's actually see where in the docs. Okay, so this is taking us into the getting started manual. And so we have gone over this. That's how good my memory is. I didn't remember until I saw where it came from. But we have discussed this and we talked about it briefly. And we also talked about it in the anti-patterns section of trying to avoid it when you can, right? Because it is just essentially injecting code into your database that you haven't written. So you want to be mindful of using it when you do. Not saying you don't ever use it, but you don't want to use it if you don't have to. So as you can see, use is just a nice keyword to invoke a macro defined in a module. Yeah. So what's happening here is the .using is calling a macro. And so this is just a nice little facade put on it, right? So this is doing the same thing as calling our module feature.using. Those macros will oftentimes paste code to the setup to set up the module in a specific way, such as a module that defines a callback might define stub versions of all its callbacks, or with default overridable versions of the callback. Yes. I think that's good. I'm glad that he mentioned it, because I feel like the anti-pattern section just kind of scared us away from wanting to use. And he kind of just reiterates that use is a macro, but you are injecting code into your current module that you haven't written. So be mindful, be smart. Is it like when using gen server on Erlang, it uses something like, now on Erlang, I'm not sure, but when you use a gen server, like if you create a gen server in an Elixir project or a Phoenix project, you will use, you'll use gen server, right? So yeah, yes, probably. Now narrow your macro scope. Remember that parameters passed into macros will be their quoted forms, which means your macro receives the abstract syntax tree, the AST nodes, which are either 3 tuples or literals like atoms. You can also have access to special variables such as the caller, which is a struct that holds information about the environment that invoked the macro. Due to some of the pitfalls with macros, such as difficulty with testing and potential for added code complexity, official Elixir docs talk more in depth about this in their anti-patterns docs. Yes, and we just went over that, which was kind of what sprouted me to continue and do the meta-programming section. And I kind of wish we did the meta-programming section and then the anti-patterns, at least the meta-programming anti-patterns, but it's all good. It is highly advised to do only It is highly advised to do work within a macro that benefits or requires being done in a macro. Okay. It is highly advised to only do work within a macro that benefits or requires being done in a macro. This typically means that you need information about calling environment or you need to generate / inject code. Yes. So when, I know we've talked about this as well, but when trying to reduce work being done in macros, you might choose to extract much of the work from the macro into a function. And we talked about this a little bit too. And in my course, you extract the work because testing macros is very hard. But if you extract most of the work into functions, then you can test those functions. So, you know, 2 birds, 1 stone, right? One, functions are easier for us to read and understand. And then you have less code being compiled at compile time. Then call that function from within the macro, passing whatever compile time information you need from the macro. Yeah, that makes sense. Just remember that the macro must return a valid AST node after all is said and done. And we also saw that yesterday when we wrote the unless macro and the function version of it. Arguments are ran before it got passed into the function, right? So we saw an IO put statement get printed out in the IEX shell, and then the if statement return nil, right? But then when in the macro version, since an AST is being passed in, the same thing didn't happen because it's not being built, or the code is not running the arguments because it's an AST. So those small little features are important to know. Also, like, you wouldn't very often, I feel like you wouldn't pass an IO puts as an argument, but I thought it was a good example. Accepting literals as arguments. I found myself wanting to accept the name of the module as an argument. Remember that an alias, even when available in the normal kernel context, such as the string module, is still an alias and represented as a 3 tuple when passed to a macro. Yeah, so an alias is a macro, right? So if you want to use the module name in your macro without doing pattern matching, so he's saying without passing in, you know, this 3-value tuple, or other contingencies to account for this, you can use the macro.expandLiterals arity2 function to expand this AST node to its literal value of string. Okay, yes, so you'll need to provide a macro.environment as the second argument, which will usually be either the caller if you want to preserve the caller's context. So or the environment to use the context at the invocation location of the macro. So basically what the expand literals would do is it would return elixir.string as the name of the module instead of this tuple, which is probably a smarter way to do it, right? To avoid having to do pattern matching to the tuple, and it just gives you a readable name to use. Composing quoted statement. A common pattern is to dynamically construct some code that you want to inject / return from the macro. You might have some code at the beginning that always should be included, then have some different code depending on certain conditions. For example, with Flint, I optionally include some code if the schema keyword is included as an option. So I break it up into 2 parts. Okay, so this is cool. All right, so he's overriding the using macro here, right? And it's taking options. And let's see, he's looking for the schema option. Okay. So every time that this schema macro is being required or used in another module, we're always importing these things here. But then if schema is included as an option, he's doing more things. So not only is he taking, let's see, I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. Yeah, okay. So if schema is included as an option, he has the prelude here, which is this. So he's creating an alias and he's importing type. And then after compile, he's running flint.schema. So if that's included, he's including it if the schema is in the options. And then he's also doing more work here with the schema. And then if schema isn't included, he's just taking the preluded imports and aliases. So that is a great example. I like that. So once it starts getting a bit more complex, however, this doesn't work very well. So instead, you can collect all the quoted parts into a list and use unquote splicing to expand all of the parts into one quoted statement. Ooh, I feel like this is getting spicy. This is going to get hard for me. Here's an example of this technique that's actually used in Flint. All right, let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. Okay, so we have imports. We are mapping through let's see. Here, I'm going to read his, without getting into the details of what this is doing or why for that matter, you can see that the first line assigns imports to the result of an enum map that maps inputs to a quoted statement. So imports is a list of quoted statements. Okay, so that's good. So we have a list of quoted statements right here. All right, and then contents is another quoted statement that uses unquote splicing to effectively expand and paste each of the list items as its own line in a quoted statement. Okay, so contents is then another quoted statement that uses unquote splicing. And what this function is doing is it is expanding each of our list items into its own line in a quoted statement. Okay, that's cool. I think I understand what is happening. So essentially, we could have, let's see, we have just a bunch of imports, right? And so what is happening up here, like this unquote prelude could be a bunch of things like this. And so we're just creating a couple lines of all of these different imports. And then the splicing allows us to unquote them all at once. Okay, so that's really cool. That's good to know. Manually constructing AST nodes. All right, sometimes it's actually easier to manually construct an AST node. I ran into this while writing Merquery. Merquery acts as a UI for the wonderful rec library. As a smart cell, it can generate code based on user inputs. All right, so we have some keys here, token, and then the value is a GitHub token. And then we have a key page, and that is value 2. Here is a form that is used to input query parameters. You can see the value in the top row corresponds to a secret environment variable from Livebook Secret Hub. I wanted to have the generated code not leak the actual secret while still having the code work. So it has to use system.fetch-environment or some variation of getting the environment variables. Here's the generated code from the smart cell. You can see that it calls system fetch environment and prepends the secret token with LB, which is required for getting secrets stored in Livebook. All right, so that's good. I didn't know that, but I also don't use Livebook, and I keep saying that I need to because I do. I think it would be a great tool to use to create Elixir lessons and correspond with a lot of my tutorials that I build. So let's see, we have our rec new, and he's taking his param. So he has a token, right? From right here, his key token. And then he is fetching the LB GitHub token. So let's see. He's prepending fetch environment. Here's generated code from the smart cell. You can see that it calls the system.fetch and prepends the token, the secret token with the, okay. Yeah, so GitHub token is a value that is in Livebook's secrets, and it's called GitHub token. And he's calling it token on his side for his HTTP client. And then so he's automatically he knows that LB has to be prepended to the GitHub token name to fetch it from the livebook environment. That makes sense. Each row is represented as a multi-input struct. Here is how its contents are converted to the quoted form. You will notice that it converts differently depending on the type of cell, and the aforementioned secret cell is the first case. Each row is mapped to a tuple of a key value pair. All right, so he has functions here with pattern matching. So two quoted, and we're taking our multi-input struct. And then the top one here, we're pattern matching the key value and the type secret. Okay. And then, okay, this makes sense. And then his quote, so he's building a tuple here with the key, and then he's taking the AST version of the environment, and he automatically prepends the LB to the value, and the value was GitHub token. So he's prepending the LB. So we're actually grabbing this out of the livebook environment. All right, cool. And then, so we have two other cases to match. And so we've matched that to secret. And then we're matching to another type called plain text. And that, it looks like we're just passing through the key and the value for plain text. And then the last type is variable. And variable, we're taking the tuple key, and then we're also returning the AST of, so merquery.helpers, and then we're calling another function called quoted var and passing in the variable. So he's creating basically three different ASTs, right? Yeah, AST nodes. And now this is how the overall table is converted to code. You can see that the final line outputs a 3 tuple, which is manually constructing the map from the list of quoted entries. All right, so two quoted, let's see, two quoted takes the module, a query, the field name, and then and then whatever input we're getting back as we map through all these queries, he's creating his own AST node that is a map, and then the meta description is just an empty list, but then he's returning his created AST nodes as the arguments, right? Okay, so that is pretty cool. So with how unique this output is, it was much easier to manually construct the map rather than trying to construct the whole map within a quoted statement. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool. Well, that's all for now. This is a short article. Let me know what you think, and if you have any other quick tips as well. Andres, this was awesome. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us. And the link to this article, guys, is in the description. So go ahead and give it a read through. And I would highly suggest checking out his projects too, Merquery and Flint, definitely worthwhile. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. If other people need to or have like articles written up or any kind of thing that they want me to read through, and like even like code alongs, I'll do code alongs and run through examples. This is a lot of fun. I'm glad that Andres had this idea, and yeah, it was cool. So thank you guys for everyone that tuned in. I appreciate you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Let me see real quick. Elixir events. We have Felipe coming on from Superbase, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be just talking about Elixir and, you know, everything that he's done over there. So we're going to have a really good conversation. That's tomorrow, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for joining me, guys. Enjoying the video? Show some love with a like and hit subscribe to stay updated. To support me and keep the content free, click join for memberships or pick up a course at elixirmentor.com and get free access to my private community. Let's jump back in. All right, guys, have a good one.